Hello, investors and traders, and welcome to the weekly market report. I'm AJ Monte, Chief Technical Analyst with StickyTrades, and we are under the 2-minute mark. Here we are looking at DIA, which is the ETF for the Dow Jones Industrial Average, and you can see that today we stopped right at the 20-period moving average. Now, as we are coming into the close, I just want to show you what's happening with the minute-by-minute chart. We are drifting still lower with lower highs and lower lows right here into the close. However, as we are approaching this holiday weekend, I do expect that next week, with it being a thinly traded market, we could see a little bit of a bounce. Now, that might sound surprising coming from me here lately that I'm so bearish. And I do believe that we're going to do what we call a zigzag or an ABCD pattern right into next week. So let me zoom in and give you the forecast. As we mentioned on Wednesday, I said the markets were pivoting lower. That's exactly what happened. Yesterday, the Dow was down 600 points. And notice what's happening to the volume today. We have no follow through. Yes, we do have a close below that moving average, but we don't have the volume to support it. And looking at the wide divergence between the K and the D on the stochastic, I think we could go a little bit higher. And then another drop in volume and proceed down. Now, I'm not going to forecast this in one straight line lower. Here we are coming into the close, as I mentioned. That is the official close. However, I did mention that I believe that we are duplicating this leg lower. And it's almost like a mirror image. You could see that we had this big red candle with a push lower. And then what happened right after that day, we had a bullish harami and a bounce. And so here is the A to B, and then the bounce to C, and then a pivot lower from C all the way to the lower D. Well, what do we have again? We have from A to B. Well, we can't actually put the B there until we get the pivot on Tuesday, and I think we will. But then we could put a B to a higher C. And then once we get a lower price pivot like we did back here, then we would expect to take the ride lower, just like we did back here in early April. So keep an eye on the charts. We are mimicking this down leg almost precisely and exactly with this big red candle like we saw here yesterday. So that is DIA. So short-term upside target, let me get that number there for you. Short-term upside target, I do believe we're going to see up to 393.51. Then ultimately the downturn to the target that I have here at 379.61. Now we're probably going to see the same thing in IWM. We have a bullish harami right here. Again, we had an ABCD back here. Remember, A to B, the pivot up brings us to C, and then a pivot lower brings us to a lower D. Now, when trading ABCD patterns, you might think the advantage, or I would say the big trade, is coming from a bounce off of a B, and that's not necessarily true when you're looking at a down leg. The big opportunity is when we rally up from B and then pivot back lower from C, because the higher probability trade is a lower D. You see that? So ABCD is not the same as an Elliott wave. It's very, very different. We're trading more or less 3 legs in a overall down leg. So it's 3 segments in a down leg. And so this is not considered a pivot just yet. A bullish harami has a higher low, but it has a lower high. So that's a half signal. And so this would be a pivot back here. If you could see it, magnify that for you behind that line. Let me get rid of those lines so you can actually see it. Here is a lower high, lower low here. But here on this day, this red candle is a higher low, higher high. There's your pivot. I think on Tuesday we could see a higher low, higher high, which would then bring us to the setup to C. Again, I teach through repetition. So here we go. A to B, pivot. So you can label that as B, up to a higher C, and then a pivot lower from C brings us to a lower D. So again, this area right here becomes the highest probability for the trade setup on an ABCD pattern in a down leg. The opposite is true on an up leg. Right here would be A. See the pivot up. Here's your V, the pivot. Then to a B, then back down to a C, and then the pivot up from C brings you to a higher D. A, B, C, D, A, B, C, D. Remember that. This is really as simple as A, B, C, D. And I have to tell you that this is a very technical market. So as I put my targets in here for you, again, I believe that we will see a higher C point and then the pivot down. So upside target for next week and then the immediate downturn. Upside target is 206.63. Then the downturn eventually bringing us to 198.95, which is that green dotted line. It's going to be the same thing for the markets. You could see right here, we have a bullish harami on the Qs, and mainly you have to understand this is all NVIDIA that's driving this. Now, we're not going to have the ABCD like we had in the diamonds and IWM, at least not yet, because we don't have a pivot here. We have to first form the A. So here, I think we're going to go a little bit higher, but then I think we're going to get a new A up here at a pivot probably next week, and then we could start zigzagging the ABCD down. This is a longer term target right now, 425.73. One of the main reasons I keep that is because of the gap below the market. Remember, we're still in May. So remember, we haven't seen the sell in May go away crowd come in yet. But if you look at the monthly candle, that is looking very bearish right now. You've got the drop in volume here, and we don't have that many days left. We need a higher volume to sustain the higher prices, even with the Qs, even with NVIDIA. So you got to be really careful. Any new longs out there, I certainly hope you're trailing your stops and using good risk management technique. All right, let's take a look at SPY. I think we're going to see the same thing. We're going to see a little bit of a rally, then the turn lower from here, and then we could start the zigzag. So this high up here, once that pivot forms, will now begin the new A as we construct the ABCD leg on the downside. Ultimately, 501.22, we have a negative divergence on that CCI, hence the reason why I'm not super bullish on the upside here, even for the spiders. Now, taking a look at the VIX, look what's happening here. We had a bearish candle show up that is almost a bearish Marabuzzo. A bearish Marabuzzo is defined by a red candle that has no shadows whatsoever. There is a very slight shadow at the top of the candle. See that as I magnify that, but that's pretty bearish. So again, if the S&P is expected to go up short term, I expect the VIX to drop short term and then start to make its move higher. Again, I have an upside target ultimately on the VIX at 1838. I keep that open gap in the minds of all of our subscribers because that gap will fill. I guarantee that, and I talk about that all the time, and then I get the hecklers in there who have no idea about the VIX and how gaps fill because it's an oscillating index. All right, next, I want to talk a little bit about silver, SLV. We have a pivot lower here. I do believe that silver is going to continue to go lower because the oscillators are not relenting here. They're still showing downside momentum right here. Yes, we have a drop in volume, but if you get a stronger dollar next week, silver could drop because they've been trading inversely to one another. And so I do think that we could see a little bit of a bounce here in the dollar. We'll have to see. And if it gets over that 20-period moving average, then silver will drop. Now, I do want to make another comment on Bitcoin. For you Bitcoin traders out there, my short-term downside target on Bitcoin is 64,000. Go to my X page, and you will be able to find out what I'm doing there. Just go to AJ BTC forecasts, hashtag AJ BTC forecasts, and you'll see all the charts that I put up on Bitcoin. Now let's get to the geopolitical news. Now, first understand that we are looking right now at a real estate market that is under some pretty big pressure. You notice what's happening with total existing home sales are dropping quite dramatically. Now, I don't have a whole lot of slides here because we're coming into a holiday weekend and a lot of things could happen over a 3-day weekend, but this is a stat that is hard to manipulate. And I want you to keep an eye on that because we talk about pivot points and ABCD patterns and all that. Well, it's not going to be exactly the same. We have an A to B, a bounce at B, and now a downturn at C. So we could see this drop with existing home sales. And the main reason for that is that the confidence of home buyers is dropping to 50-year lows. Again, you don't hear this in the headlines because no one wants to talk about it. It's too negative, right? Well, the crash is coming. The bubbles are stacking up, and there's bubbles within bubbles. You could believe me or not. And if you don't believe me, then I have to say at least believe the charts or learn enough to read the charts so you can at least protect yourself and manage risk. Remember, for those who are members, we took 2 new long positions yesterday. So we do play the markets from the long side in the short term, but our long-term outlook is extremely bearish. So for those of you who think that I'm just the ultra bear, understand if you remember, we are making money from the long side. Okay, finally, last slide. 2 Fed officials this week say more interest rate rises may be needed to cool prices. You saw what happened yesterday and why the Dow dropped 600 points. Inflation is absolutely not under control. The Fed knows this. Of course, they have to vote on this. It's not just Fed Chair Powell that makes the decisions. But when you have Fed officials coming out saying, you know what, we need to raise rates, not lower rates, that'll shake up the market. Remember, we have a 3-day weekend. Thank you so much for following, liking. I'm taking a long weekend. Our members know, the option traders know there will be no option webinar on Monday, and our VIPs have voted not to have a 2 o'clock VIP session. So that gives me a little chance to breathe, relax, and regroup for next week. And I hope you all do the same. Have a great weekend, and I'll talk to you next week. So long.